Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What is it about her energy that stays with him even after the moment is over? Why does he try to move forward, distract himself, stay logical, stay busy, stay distant, and still find that something about her lingers in ways he cannot explain? Because sometimes it is not her words he remembers most. Not even the situation itself. It is the energy, the feeling of her presence, the way she made him feel seen without forcing him, the way her softness reached places his defenses could not fully protect, the way her silence said more than noise ever could, the way being near her awakened something he thought he had buried long ago. And that is what unsettles him, because he may be able to forget conversations, forget timing, forget details, forget what he told himself the connection was supposed to mean. But he cannot forget how her energy moved through him. Why? Because some energies do not just pass through a man. They reveal him. They expose what is hidden. They awaken what is sleeping. They make the old self feel smaller and the soul feel louder. So why can't he forget her energy after this? Why does her presence keep returning in the quiet? Why does the memory of how she felt stay in his body long after distance begins? And why does this often become the very thing that starts changing him from the inside out? In this video, we're going deep into the real reason he can't forget her energy after this, and why what lingers is not just memory, but the truth of what her energy awakened inside him. Chapter 1: Why energy is different from ordinary attraction. There are some people a man can walk away from, and then there are some energies he cannot. That is the difference. Not every attraction stays with the divine masculine. Not every beautiful face lingers. Not every connection enters the body, the nervous system, the heart, the soul. Some connections are felt, and then life continues. But some energies follow him. Quietly. Powerfully. Long after the conversation is over. Long after the distance begins. Long after he tells himself he should be fine, should move on, should return to the version of himself he was before. And that is because energy is different from ordinary attraction. Ordinary attraction can stimulate him. Energy can alter him. Ordinary attraction catches the eye. Energy reaches the hidden self. Ordinary attraction may create desire. Energy creates imprint. That is what makes it unforgettable. Because what he is carrying is not just memory of a person. It is the emotional and spiritual impact of how that person felt. Her presence, her calm, her softness, her truth, the way she entered his awareness without trying too hard, the way something about her moved through him before he had words for it. And once that kind of energy enters, it does not leave like an ordinary moment leaves. This is what so many people misunderstand. They assume that if he cannot forget her, it must be because he is obsessed with the details. The conversations, the timing, the what if, the outer story. But often, that is not the deepest reason. The deepest reason is energetic contact. Her energy touched something inside him that had not been touched in a very long time, or perhaps had never been touched in that exact way before. It reached past the usual filters, past logic, past controlled attraction, past the emotional distance he may normally rely on to stay composed. It reached the part of him that reacts to truth before the mind knows how to explain what is happening. That is why energy is different. Because the mind can sometimes move on from the story. The body remembers the feeling. And what the body remembers is not always about what happened on the outside. It is about what became activated on the inside. The sense of being met, the sense of being affected. The strange feeling that in her presence, something in him became more awake than usual, more real, more seen, more emotionally alive. That kind of impact does not behave like ordinary attraction. It behaves like revelation. A real energetic connection reveals the gap between what he thought was enough and what his soul actually recognizes as truth. It reveals how flat ordinary life may have become beneath all the structure and routine. It reveals how much he has been surviving through control instead of living through depth. It reveals that some part of him is still capable of being reached far beyond what he lets most people see. That is why he cannot forget her energy. Not because she was simply attractive, but because her energy carried something his soul recognized before his ego could categorize it. This is where things get deeper. Energy is not only about presence in the mystical sense. It is also about emotional reality, about what someone transmits without forcing. Some people come with noise, performance, intensity that stays on the surface. Others carry a quieter power, a truth, a softness, a depth, a groundedness, a kind of emotional frequency that makes the masculine feel things he usually keeps under control. That is the kind of energy that lingers, because it does not only make him feel wanted, it makes him feel himself. And that can be more destabilizing than attraction alone. A man can handle attraction. He can label it, enjoy it, distance from it if needed. But what does he do when someone's energy makes him feel more present inside his own body? More exposed to his own tenderness? More aware of the hidden ache he has been carrying? More conscious of what he has buried under years of composure, responsibility, emotional restraint, or self-protection? That is a different kind of experience. Because now he is not only encountering her, he is encountering himself through her. That is why energy stays. The ordinary mind may try to move on, but the deeper self keeps circling back to what it felt in her presence. Not necessarily because he wants to romanticize the story, but because something in him knows it was real. And real things do not vanish just because the outer situation changes. This is why the divine masculine may find himself remembering the feeling of her more than the facts. He may not replay every word, but he cannot forget the atmosphere, the emotional field, the way she made the moment feel calmer and more dangerous at the same time. Calmer, because some part of him felt understood. More dangerous, because being understood that deeply threatened the old identity built around staying unreadable. That is the paradox of real energy. It can feel peaceful and disruptive at once. Peaceful because it resonates with the soul. Disruptive because it exposes everything in him that is not yet aligned with that soul-level truth. This is where attraction ends and imprint begins. Because imprint happens when the energy does not just pass through his attention. It passes into his inner world and changes the atmosphere there. He may still go to work, do normal things, say little, keep functioning. But something about his inner landscape is not the same after encountering her. Certain silences feel louder. Certain routines feel thinner. Certain distractions lose power. Why? Because once he has felt an energy that touches the truth, ordinary emotional numbness becomes harder to mistake for peace. That is one of the deepest reasons energy is different from attraction. Attraction can coexist with emotional sleep. Energy wakes something up. And once something wakes up, forgetting becomes much more complicated. Because what is he really trying to forget? Not just her presence. He is trying to forget who he became around her. How open he felt. How softened he felt. How alive he felt. How much of the old self suddenly felt insufficient in the presence of something so quietly real. That is why forgetting her energy is not simple. To forget her energy would mean trying to forget the truth it awakened in him. And that truth may be the very thing he has spent years avoiding. The truth that he wants more than surface. The truth that he is more emotionally affected than he admits. The truth that he is tired of living behind certain defenses. The truth that some part of him still longs for a depth he taught himself not to expect safely. Her energy touches that. That is why it lingers. This is also why two people can have what looks like a short or understated connection on the outside, yet he carries her deeply afterward. The outer timeline does not always reflect the inner impact. One real energetic moment can do more than months of ordinary interaction if it reaches a place in him that has long been untouched. That is what soul-level energy does. It bypasses the performance. It reaches the nervous system, the deeper memory, the emotional body, the quiet hunger, the hidden tenderness. And once he has been reached there, he is not dealing with a simple attraction anymore. He is dealing with a shift in perception, a shift in what feels real, a shift in how the old life compares to what he felt in her presence. That shift is often what he cannot forget. Because maybe the deepest truth is this. He is not haunted by her energy because it was dramatic. He is haunted by it because it was honest. It did not flatter the old self. It revealed him beneath it. It did not only create desire. It created recognition. It did not only make him want her. It made him aware of what his soul has been missing, what his heart still remembers, and what the old self can no longer fully deny once it has been felt. That is why Chapter 1 matters so much. Because before we understand why he cannot forget her energy after this, we have to understand that energy is not the same as attraction. Attraction says, "I like this." Energy says, "This has reached me." Attraction may pass. Energy imprints. Attraction can stay in the mind. Energy enters the body, the heart, the soul. Attraction may excite him. Energy changes the way life feels afterward. That is the difference. And that difference is exactly why he cannot simply file her away as another connection, another memory, another moment. Because her energy did not just touch his attention. It touched the deeper self he can no longer fully keep asleep once it has been felt. And once that self has awakened, even a little, the masculine is never quite as comfortable in the old emotional life again. That discomfort is the beginning of the story. Because the moment he realizes energy can affect him more deeply than attraction ever did, is the moment he begins changing from the inside out. Chapter 2, her energy made him feel seen. One of the deepest reasons he cannot forget her energy after this is simple. Her energy made him feel seen. Not watched. Not analyzed. Not chased. Not forced open before he was ready. Seen. And for the divine masculine, that can be one of the most life-changing experiences of all. Because many men know what it feels like to be needed, to be expected to perform, to be valued for what they provide, how they appear, how steady they seem, how useful, capable, strong, or composed they can be. But being truly seen is different. Being seen means someone feels beyond the surface, beyond the role, beyond the armor, beyond the version of him that knows how to function while hiding his deeper emotional world. That is why her energy stays with him. Because her presence may have touched the exact place where he is least accustomed to being met. The place beneath the performance. She may not have said much. She may not have forced anything. She may not have demanded explanations, labels, or dramatic declarations. And yet somehow in her presence he felt recognized. That is the part that changes him. Because real feminine energy does not always need to push to reveal truth. Sometimes it reveals truth through stillness, through softness, through the way she holds space without trying to dominate it, through the way she sees his contradictions without immediately shaming them, through the way her presence quietly says, "I can feel there is more in you than what you are showing." That kind of recognition can shake the divine masculine more than confrontation ever could. Why? Because the old self often knows how to defend against pressure. It knows how to shut down when challenged, withdraw when pushed, hide when it feels cornered, protect itself when it feels judged or emotionally exposed too quickly. But being seen without force creates a different kind of opening. It removes the excuse to run from attack. Because there is no attack. And that can be even more unsettling. Because now he has to face something much harder. She is not making him feel exposed through pressure. She is making him feel exposed through truth. That is why her energy lingers. Because being seen in that way can feel both deeply relieving and deeply dangerous at the same time. Relieving, because some part of him has always wanted it. Wanted to stop performing. Wanted to stop managing every emotional impression so carefully. Wanted to feel understood without having to over-explain himself. Wanted to know that someone could sense the real man beneath the restraint, the silence, the emotional discipline. Dangerous because the old self does not trust visibility. It trusts control, distance, selective disclosure, the safety of staying partly unreadable. So when her energy begins seeing him beyond what he intended to reveal, something profound happens inside him. He starts feeling emotionally transparent. Not because she knows every detail of his life. Not because she solved him. But because around her, the mask becomes harder to believe in. That is the deeper meaning of being seen. It is not that she had all the answers. It is that her energy made the old answers feel thin. The old answer says, "I'm fine." Her energy makes him feel, "No, there is more in me than that." The old answer says, "I don't need much." Her energy makes him feel, "No, I have deeper hunger than I admit." The old answer says, "I'm in control." Her energy makes him feel, "No, something in me is responding beyond control." That is why being seen can change him so completely. Because the divine masculine may have built much of his identity around what he does not reveal. Around the ability to stay composed, self-contained, difficult to read. For many men, that hiddenness feels like dignity, like safety, like adulthood, like emotional intelligence. But then someone's energy comes along and quietly reveals the truth beneath that hiddenness. He is not only composed. He is tired, tender, guarded, longing, more emotionally alive than he allows most people to notice. And suddenly, hiddenness does not feel as safe as it used to. That is one of the deepest reasons her energy remains unforgettable. Because she did not just attract him. She reflected him. Not the polished version. The buried version. The one who still wants something real. The one who still wants to soften. The one who has been surviving through emotional distance and calling it strength for far too long. This is where the connection becomes sacred. Because sacred energy does not only make a man feel wanted. It makes him feel known. And feeling known can be more destabilizing than desire. Desire still allows him to stay in role. Being known threatens the role itself. That is why he may become quieter after her energy really reaches him. Not because he has nothing to say, but because too much has already been said without words. Something inside him knows she felt more than he intended to show. Something inside him knows he was more visible in her presence than he usually allows himself to be. That can create enormous internal pressure. Because now the old self has a problem. If he was seen that clearly, then he can no longer fully hide behind the identity he has built. He cannot keep pretending he is untouched if her energy already reached the touched places. He cannot easily go back to being just fine if her presence revealed how much of him has been living beneath fine. This is why some divine masculines pull away after feeling deeply seen. Not because being seen felt bad. Because it felt too real. Too intimate without needing physical closeness. Too honest without needing many words. Too accurate for the ego to comfortably dismiss. And what is difficult to dismiss is what keeps lingering. That is why he cannot forget her energy. Because her energy did not merely stay at the level of attraction. It entered the level of recognition. Recognition of the softness beneath his calm. Recognition of the contradiction beneath his silence. Recognition of the ache beneath his control. Recognition of the soul beneath the old self. That kind of recognition leaves a mark. Especially if he is not used to it. And many divine masculines are not. They may be praised, admired, desired, even loved in certain ways. But to be deeply felt without performance, without pressure, without him having to explain or prove everything first, that is rare. That reaches the places where emotional loneliness has often lived for years. This is important. Because when a man feels seen in a place where he has long felt alone, the nervous system notices. The heart notices. The soul notices. Even if the mind tries to minimize it later. Some deeper part of him keeps returning to the experience because it carried a truth he has been starving for. The truth that he can be met without pretending. The truth that someone can sense him beneath the defense. The truth that the real self is not invisible after all. That is beautiful. And terrifying. Because once he knows he can be seen like that, he must face another painful truth. He has been hiding even from himself. That is often what her energy exposes most of all. Not only that she sees him, but that she sees the version of him he has not fully allowed himself to live from. The more honest self. The more tender self. The more emotionally real self. The self that no longer wants to spend his whole life being known only in fragments. That can create longing. Not only for her, but for the life he felt possible around her. The life where he did not have to perform so much. The life where silence did not protect him from everything true. The life where being seen did not feel like defeat, but like relief. That is why her energy can become unforgettable. Because it gives him a felt experience of something his soul has been missing. And once he has felt that, even briefly, the old way of living starts feeling different. Flatter. More defended. Less alive. The contrast becomes part of the imprint. He is no longer just remembering her. He is remembering the version of himself that came closer to the surface around her. That is why this chapter matters so much. He cannot forget her energy after this because her energy made him feel seen. And being seen at the soul level is not a small thing. It is not casual. It is not easy to dismiss. It reaches beneath attraction and starts changing identity. Maybe that is the deepest truth here. What stays with him is not only that she was present. It is how she was present. She did not just notice him. She felt him. She did not just react to what he showed. She touched what he hid. She did not just make him feel interesting. She made him feel visible. And once a man has felt truly visible in the presence of someone's energy, he may still run, still resist, still go silent, still try to return to old control. But he cannot fully forget, because something in him has already been witnessed. And once the hidden self has been witnessed, it begins wanting to live. That desire to live is what makes her energy unforgettable. It is not only memory. It is awakening. Chapter 3. He can't forget what her energy awakened. What stays with him is not only her. It is what her energy awakened. That is the deeper truth. Because the divine masculine may try to tell himself he misses the person, the moment, the timing, the connection itself. And yes, all of that can be true. But often what lingers most is not only the outer experience. It is the inner awakening that happened in her presence. The version of himself that came alive. The emotions that resurfaced. The tenderness he could no longer hide from. The old grief that suddenly had a pulse again. The longing that rose from a place deeper than attraction. That is what he cannot forget. Because some energies do not merely pass through a man. They activate him. They touch dormant places. Sleeping places. Buried places. The parts of him he has lived around for years without fully facing, because facing them would have changed too much. Then her energy arrives. And something in him begins moving. Not just mentally. Not just romantically. Internally. He feels more present inside his own body. More emotionally exposed. More aware of what he has been carrying. More aware of what he wants. More aware of how defended he has become. That is why he cannot forget her energy after this. Because what her energy awakened is not easy to put back to sleep. This is one of the deepest things to understand about the divine masculine. He can sometimes leave a situation physically. He can go silent, pull back, return to routine. Tell himself he needs space, time, clarity, control. He can do all the outer things that make it appear as though he is stepping away. But if her energy awakens something real in him, distance will not erase it. Because he is not only carrying her presence. He is carrying what became conscious in him because of her presence. That is what makes it different. Maybe he awakened to how lonely he has actually been. Maybe he awakened to the fact that his emotional control is not peace. Maybe he awakened to the tenderness beneath the pride. Maybe he awakened to needs he has long called weakness. Maybe he awakened to the reality that his soul is far more alive, hungry, and affected than the old identity ever wanted to admit. Whatever it was, once it awakened, it changed the whole landscape. This is why he may feel haunted in the quiet. Not haunted in a dramatic or mystical sense alone. Haunted by contrast. The contrast between who he was before her energy touched him and who he felt himself becoming around her. The contrast between ordinary life and the strange aliveness her presence created. The contrast between the old self he trusted and the deeper self that came closer to the surface when she was near. That contrast is hard to live with once it has been felt. Because now he knows something. He knows that beneath all the silence, the structure, the composure, there is more inside him than he let himself live from. More truth. More emotional reality. More softness. More capacity for soul-level recognition. more vulnerability, more hunger for something real. And he knows it because her energy called it out. That is what lingers. A man can often forget what only stimulated him. He struggles to forget what revealed him. That is the difference between shallow chemistry and soul imprint. Shallow chemistry excites the surface. Soul imprint awakens the hidden self. And the hidden self, once stirred, starts asking questions the old self cannot answer comfortably. Why did I feel so alive near her? Why did peace feel different in her presence? Why did her energy make my usual life feel flatter afterward? Why do I keep returning, not only to her, but to the version of myself I touched around her? That last question matters deeply. Because often he is not only missing her energy. He is missing himself in her energy. The self that softened. The self that felt safe enough to stop performing for a moment. The self that felt seen, affected, emotionally awake. The self that did not have to reduce everything into neat explanations. That self begins haunting the old life. Because once he has met it, the old self begins feeling smaller by comparison. More controlled, yes. More protected, yes. But also more false, more lonely, more spiritually cramped. This is why he can't forget. Not because memory is holding him hostage. Because truth is. Truth about what he felt. Truth about what was reached. Truth about what in him is no longer willing to stay unconscious once it has been touched by something real. Her energy may have awakened grief. Grief for the parts of himself he buried long ago. Grief for how much of life he has lived at a distance from his own soul. Grief for how long he accepted emotional half-life as enough. Her energy may have awakened longing. Not only longing for her, but longing for depth, honesty. And the kind of connection that asks him to become more real than the old self allows. Her energy may have awakened tenderness. A tenderness he does not know how to carry yet. A softness that frightens the old masculine structure, because softness means he is affected. Reachable, no longer safely hidden behind emotional discipline alone. Her energy may have awakened conscience. The realization that he can no longer keep living from the same defenses without feeling their cost more sharply than before. The realization that silence is not neutral once the soul has been touched. Whatever it awakened, the effect is the same. He cannot go back to emotional sleep the same way. That is what makes her energy unforgettable. Not because it was only beautiful, but because it was revealing. It revealed the difference between numb peace and living truth. It revealed the difference between being admired and being felt. It revealed the difference between staying in control and actually being alive. And once a man has felt that difference, ordinary forgetting becomes impossible. He may still try. He may bury himself in work, in routine, in logic, in distractions, in distance. But the awakened part remains. It follows him into silence, into the in-between moments, into the body, into the strange emptiness that appears when the old life no longer feels enough to fully contain him. This is why the memory of her energy can feel stronger than memory of events. He may not replay every detail, but he remembers the feeling. How the room felt different. How his chest felt different. How his own inner world changed around her. How his defenses became harder to believe in. How life felt more honest and more dangerous at the same time. That feeling becomes the imprint. Because what is felt in the soul does not behave like ordinary memory. It becomes reference, a point of comparison, a silent knowledge inside him that says, I know what it feels like when something real reaches me. And once he knows that, he can no longer fully pretend the old emotional life is enough without feeling the lie in it. That is what her energy awakened. Not just love, not just attraction, the memory of truth, the memory of what it felt like to be more alive, more visible, more emotionally real, more spiritually reached. That is why he can't forget after this. Because forgetting her energy would mean forgetting the awakening it caused inside him. And that is harder than forgetting a person. A person can become distant. An awakening becomes part of you. That is the sacred difficulty here. He may want relief. He may want to go back. He may want to regain the old emotional equilibrium. But if her energy awakens something essential, then relief will not come through forgetting. It will only come through understanding. Understanding what was touched, why it mattered, why it keeps returning, why the old life feels altered now, why distance does not erase the imprint. And maybe that is the deepest truth of this chapter. He can't forget what her energy awakened, because what awakened was never only about her. It was about him, about the part of him that no longer wants to stay hidden, about the soul that no longer wants to stay silent, about the self that her energy called closer to the surface, and once called, can no longer be completely buried again. That is what lingers. Not just memory. A living truth inside him that now knows it has been reached. And once a man has been reached in that way, forgetting is no longer simple. Because what he would have to forget is the part of himself that finally started waking up. Chapter 4. Her energy bypassed his defenses. One of the deepest reasons he can't forget her energy after this is because her energy did something most people never do. It bypassed his defenses. That is the truth. For a long time, the divine masculine may have learned how to protect himself well. So well, in fact, that even he may mistake protection for personality. He may call it being private, careful, rational, grounded, selective, emotionally disciplined. He may feel proud of how much he can contain, how little he reveals, how calmly he moves through things that would shake other people more visibly. And in many ways, that composure is real. But beneath it, there is often a system of distance, a system of silence, a system of emotional management, a system designed to keep him from feeling too much, needing too much, revealing too much, or being changed too deeply by anything he cannot control. Those are his defenses. And most of the time, they work. They filter people, reduce intensity, create emotional space, allow him to stay one step removed from whatever might threaten the old identity. But some energies do not stop at the gate. Some energies move past the defenses quietly. Not through force. Not through pressure. Not through emotional chasing. Through truth. That is what her energy did. It reached him before the defenses fully knew what was happening. It did not argue with his walls. It moved around them. It did not try to overpower his control. It made control less relevant. It did not demand that he open. It created the kind of presence where some hidden part of him opened on its own. That is why it stays with him. Because the old self knows how to recover from ordinary attraction. It knows how to regulate chemistry, excitement, even emotional intensity to a degree. But when someone's energy bypasses the very strategies he uses to stay emotionally protected, the impact becomes much harder to contain. This is where the experience becomes unforgettable. Because now he is not just dealing with a person he liked. He is dealing with the fact that something reached him in a place where he thought he was unreachable. That is destabilizing. Because a man can live a long time believing his defenses are solid if no one reaches deeply enough to challenge them. He can think his distance is natural, his silence is harmless, his restraint is simply maturity. He can believe he is choosing what touches him. Then her energy enters. And suddenly, he feels more than he meant to. He thinks about her more than he planned to. He notices a softness in himself he did not authorize. He feels the old control slipping not in a chaotic way, but in a truthful way. And that is the part he cannot forget. Because once his defenses have been bypassed, the illusion of invulnerability begins breaking. Not completely all at once, but enough. Enough that he starts realizing he is more permeable than he believed, more reachable, more affected, more spiritually and emotionally exposed than the old self likes to admit. That can create enormous inner conflict. Part of him may feel relief, because being reached can feel like rest. Another part feels alarm, because being reached means the old protection system is no longer unquestioned. This is why some of the deepest energetic connections feel peaceful and unsettling at the same time. Peaceful, because the soul recognizes truth. Unsettling, because the ego recognizes loss of control. Her energy may have felt calm, but not neutral. Soft, but not weak. Grounded, but strangely penetrating. He may have felt that around her, he did not need to perform as much. Or perhaps more accurately, he could not perform as convincingly. The usual emotional distance did not create the same safety. The usual mental explanations did not fully reduce the impact. Why? Because her energy was not only interacting with his surface. It was interacting with what lived underneath it. This is what it means for energy to bypass defenses. It reaches the part of him that still longs, the part of him that still grieves, the part of him that is tired of emotional exile, the part of him that secretly wants truth more than control, the part of him he only lets surface in very rare moments of safety. And once that part has been reached, something changes forever. He may still pull away, still go silent, still try to recover distance. But the defenses are no longer fully innocent. Because now he knows something they did not want him to know. They do not protect everything. And they may not even protect what matters most. That is a devastating realization for the old self. Because if his walls can be bypassed, then he has to question what those walls are really doing. Are they giving him peace? Or are they only preserving a version of him that is becoming too small for what his soul now feels? That is where awakening begins deepening. A real connection often does not overpower the divine masculine through drama. It disarms him through resonance. Her energy may have resonated with a truth in him that existed long before she arrived. That is why he can't forget it. It did not feel random. It felt exact. As if something in him recognized the frequency before the mind could understand why. As if her presence landed in a place already waiting for something real enough to touch it. That kind of contact is hard to dismiss. Because he may be able to talk himself out of a story. He may not be able to talk himself out of resonance. The body remembers resonance. The heart remembers it. The soul remembers it. And resonance is what makes defenses less effective. Because defenses are built to manage what feels external. But when someone's energy resonates with his deeper self, it no longer feels external. It feels internal, intimate, immediate. It feels like something in him has been called forward. That is why this can become so uncomfortable. Because now he cannot simply say, "She affected me." The deeper truth is, she reached something in me I have not known how to protect from truth. That is far more personal. And perhaps more frightening. Because if the defenses fail, then what is left? What is left is the real man underneath them. The one who feels. The one who longs. The one who still wants tenderness. The one who is tired of always staying in control. The one who knows, even if quietly, that the life built around distance is not the same as a life built around peace. That is who her energy reached. And that is why he cannot forget it. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was accurate. It found the exact place where his old self and his deeper self were already in tension. It touched the split, the contradiction, the hidden hunger, the unspoken need. The part of him that still wanted to be real even while the old identity kept insisting on safety first. That is why energy can be more powerful than words. Words meet the mind first. Energy often meets the truth first. And if the truth has been lonely inside him for a long time, being met there can feel like shock. A beautiful shock, perhaps. A dangerous one, perhaps. But a shock nonetheless. Because now the old self is not only dealing with a memory of her. It is dealing with evidence. Evidence that he is not as sealed off as he thought. Evidence that something in him still responds to what is sacred. Evidence that his emotional life is not dead, only defended. Evidence that her presence awakened more honesty in him than many louder experiences ever did. This is why after certain connections, his old coping methods stop working as cleanly. Silence feels heavier. Distance feels flatter. Logic feels thinner. Not because these things disappeared, but because once something true has bypassed the defenses, those defenses cannot fully restore the old unconsciousness. That is the sacred problem her energy creates. She does not just stay in his thoughts. She changes how his old protection system feels to him. Now the walls are not only walls. They are reminders of what they could not stop. And maybe that is the deepest truth of this chapter. He can't forget her energy after this, because her energy bypassed the very parts of him that usually keep life emotionally manageable. It reached the hidden self, the reachable self, the honest self. And once that self has been touched, the old defenses may still stand for a while. But they no longer feel like home. They feel like delay. And once a man starts feeling his own defenses as delay instead of safety, change is already on the way. That is why her energy lingers. Not because he is weak, because something real got through. And when something real gets through, forgetting is never just about forgetting another person. It becomes about whether he can return to being the man he was before truth slipped past the walls. Usually he cannot. Not completely. Because once the defenses have been bypassed, the soul has proof that it is still alive. And that proof changes everything. Chapter 5. He felt peace and exposure at the same time. One of the most confusing reasons he can't forget her energy after this is because her energy made him feel two opposite things at once. Peace and exposure. That combination is unforgettable. Because the divine masculine may have felt attraction before, intensity before, chemistry before, excitement before, even emotional pull before. But peace and exposure together? That is different. That is rare. And that is exactly why her energy stays with him long after the moment is over. Because peace alone can be comforting. Exposure alone can be threatening. But when someone's energy creates both at the same time, it reaches a layer of the masculine that ordinary connection usually cannot touch. It says, without words, you are safe enough to soften here, and honest enough that you can no longer hide from what softening reveals. That is powerful. Because for many divine masculines, peace and exposure have not belonged together in their past. Peace may have meant distance, control, silence, emotional restraint, not needing too much, not revealing too much. Exposure may have meant danger, instability, shame, vulnerability without safety. Being too visible in places where visibility once cost him something. So when her energy creates an experience where he feels calm and unguarded at the same time, the whole old system becomes confused. He thinks, why do I feel so settled around her and also so undone? Why does her presence soothe me and unsettle me in the same breath? Why does this feel safe and terrifying at the same time? Because this is not surface attraction. This is energetic truth. And energetic truth often works in paradox. Her energy may have felt calm, warm, grounded, feminine, unforced. Perhaps she did not chase, did not perform, did not demand. Perhaps she simply was present, real, emotionally clear in a way that made his usual defenses feel louder by contrast. Around that kind of energy, the masculine nervous system may feel something rare. A moment of exhale. A moment where he does not have to posture so hard. Does not have to explain so much. Does not have to overmanage the atmosphere. Does not have to hold everything up with effort alone. That is the peace. But peace like that is not neutral. Because the moment he relaxes, he becomes more visible to himself. That is the exposure. When the defenses soften, even briefly, what has been hidden underneath them becomes easier to feel. The tenderness, the longing, the grief, the fear of being seen, the needs he has spent years calling not important, the emotional hunger he kept translating into self-sufficiency. Her energy may not have caused those things. It revealed them. That is why peace becomes exposure. Because the peace she carried was not the peace of numbness. It was the peace of truth. And truth exposes what false peace helped him avoid. This is one of the deepest reasons her energy lingers in him. Because it did not simply excite him. It disarmed him. It made him feel held enough to soften, and once softened, he could no longer avoid the deeper emotional reality underneath the armor. That is what unsettles him most. Not that she brought chaos, but that she brought calm powerful enough to reveal what the chaos had been hiding. This matters. Because many divine masculines have spent years calling emotional control peace. They may have believed that staying distant, private, or unreadable meant they were centered. That if they kept enough space between themselves and others, they could remain stable. That if they stayed selective in what they revealed, they could preserve an inner sense of safety. Then someone's energy enters and offers a completely different kind of peace. A peace that does not come from distance. a peace that does not come from shutting down, a peace that does not require him to become less real, that can be deeply moving and deeply threatening, because now the old self has a problem. If peace can exist with vulnerability, if peace can exist with closeness, if peace can exist with emotional truth, then what does that say about the life he built around protection? It says that maybe the old peace was not peace at all. Maybe it was containment, management, avoidance, silence. That realization is painful, because it means the soul is now comparing the old peace with this new one, comparing distance with presence, comparing control with the strange relief of being near someone whose energy did not require him to keep performing strength every second. And once that comparison happens, forgetting becomes much harder, because he is not only missing her, he is missing what he felt inside himself around her. The quiet, the drop in tension, the subtle permission to be more human, the sense that he did not have to hold his emotional world so tightly for a moment. That is the peace. But intertwined with that peace was another truth. Being near her made him more visible. He may have felt more transparent than he intended, more emotionally reachable, more spiritually exposed. Not because she invaded him, because her energy made hiding less necessary and less possible. That is why he felt peace and exposure together. And that is why the memory of her energy keeps returning. Because the masculine does not easily forget the person who made him feel safe enough to soften and honest enough to realize what softening had been protecting him from all along. Maybe it was the truth that he wants more than he says. Maybe it was the truth that he is more affected than he admits. Maybe it was the truth that his old life has become emotionally too narrow. Maybe it was the truth that being held by the right energy feels less like losing control and more like being invited back to himself. Whatever it was, her energy carried both medicine and mirror. Medicine, because it soothed something in him. Mirror, because it showed him what was actually there. That is a rare combination. A lot of people can agitate a man. A lot of people can attract him. Very few can make him feel both calmer and more revealed. And that revelation is not easy for the old self. Because the old self is not built for transparency. It is built for management. So once he has felt this paradox, peace and exposure, he may react in contradictory ways. He may feel drawn and retreating at once. He may long for the energy and also fear what more of that energy would continue awakening. He may crave the calm while resisting the truth that calm reveals. This is why some divine masculines go quiet after meeting someone's real energy. Not because they felt nothing, because they felt too much of the right thing. Not just pleasure, not just desire, a deeper peace than they are used to, paired with a deeper honesty than the old self is ready to live from consistently. That creates sacred disruption. Because now the question is no longer, did I like her? Now the question becomes, what in me came alive in her presence, and why does ordinary life feel different now that I've felt it? That is the real disturbance. And maybe that is the most important truth of this chapter. He can't forget her energy, because her energy gave him an experience of peace that did not require emotional numbness. And that kind of peace changes a man. It changes him because it reveals what he has been missing. It changes him because it proves that softness is not always danger. It changes him because it shows him a different way of existing, one where he does not have to be so defended in order to feel safe. At the same time, it exposes how much of the old self was built around never having to face the deeper feelings underneath the control. That is why her energy felt so calming. And that is why it felt so dangerous. Because calm made the truth louder. The truth of his longing. The truth of his tenderness. The truth of how tired he is of living in emotional half-light. The truth of how much he was reached. That truth is what he carries now. Not just memory of her voice or face or words. The felt memory of peace and exposure happening together. And once a man has experienced that, the old emotional strategies begin losing their innocence. Silence feels heavier. Distance feels flatter. Control feels less sacred than before. Why? Because now he knows there is another kind of peace. A peace that does not come from hiding. a peace that comes from being met. That is why he can't forget her energy after this. Because her energy did not merely make him feel good. It made him feel safe enough to soften. And soft enough to see what had been hidden underneath. That is not something the soul forgets easily. It remembers. And once it remembers, the old life never feels quite the same again. Chapter 6: Why he tries to forget, but can't. If her energy changed him so deeply, why does he still try to forget? Why does he go quiet, get busy, create distance, disappear into routine, logic, work? Or silence, and still somehow carry her with him anyway? Because trying to forget is often the old self's final attempt to regain control. That is the truth. The divine masculine does not always try to forget because the connection meant little. Sometimes he tries to forget because it meant too much. Too much to easily explain. Too much to cleanly integrate. Too much to fit inside the old life without exposing how much that old life was built around emotional distance, control, and partial truth. So he tries to create space. He tells himself, it was just a moment. It was too intense. I need to focus. I need to get my head straight. I need distance. I need to move forward. And maybe a part of him genuinely believes that if he creates enough external distance, the inner imprint will fade. But this is where the deeper problem begins. Because you can leave a situation. You cannot always leave what it awakened inside you. That is why he tries to forget and can't. Because what her energy left behind is not just memory. It is activation. Activation of his deeper self. Activation of old tenderness. Activation of emotional truth. Activation of the part of him that felt more alive, more seen, more honest, more spiritually reached than he was prepared for. And once that part has awakened, forgetting is no longer simple. He may stop talking. But inwardly, something continues. He may stop reaching. But the feeling still returns. He may remove himself physically. But in the quiet, the energetic imprint remains active in the body, the mind, the heart. This is what many people do not understand. They think forgetting is mostly mental. But the kind of connection we are talking about here does not live only in the mind. It lives in the nervous system, in emotional memory. In contrast, especially in contrast, because once he has felt her energy, he starts feeling the difference between that and everything else. The difference between ordinary interactions and what happened in her presence. The difference between surface attraction and soul recognition. The difference between the old piece of numbness and the deeper piece her energy carried. That contrast follows him. And contrast is one of the hardest things to erase. He may go back to routine, but routine feels flatter. He may go back to other conversations, but they feel thinner. He may go back to the old emotional distance, but now the distance feels heavier because he knows what it felt like to be reached beyond it. That is why forgetting fails. Not because he is weak. Because the body has reference now. A reference for what real energy felt like. A reference for what it felt like to soften. A reference for what it felt like to be met in a way that bypassed the old defenses. A reference for what truth felt like in human form. And once a man has that reference, ordinary forgetting becomes impossible in the old way. This is also why distraction only works temporarily. He may throw himself into work, into goals, into structure, into busyness. Why? Because busyness gives the old self something familiar. Movement without emotional surrender. It helps him feel functional, directed, contained. It gives him the comforting illusion that he can outrun what still rises in stillness. But stillness keeps coming. At night. In the car. In quiet moments. Between obligations. After everyone is gone and the room gets emotionally honest again. And in those moments, what he tried to push down often rises back up. The feeling of her presence, the memory of how her energy felt, the strange ache of what was awakened, the sense that something in him is still unfinished. That unfinished feeling is what makes forgetting so hard, because he is not only trying to forget a person, he is trying to forget a state of being, a state in which he felt more emotionally awake, more transparent, more alive, more confronted by truth, more aware of what his soul has been missing. That state threatens the old self because it cannot be easily managed. It says too much. It reveals too much. It makes the old explanations sound weak. It makes the old life feel emotionally insufficient. So of course he tries to forget. Forgetting would mean relief. Forgetting would mean the old self can recover its throne. Forgetting would mean he can go back to being the version of himself that knew how to survive without so much inner disturbance. But that version has already been disrupted. That is why the forgetting does not complete itself. Because once something real has entered him, he is no longer trying to erase only her energy. He is trying to erase the evidence that he is more emotionally affected, more spiritually reachable, and more internally divided than he thought. That evidence keeps resurfacing. Maybe as longing, maybe as restlessness, maybe as comparison, maybe as emotional fatigue, maybe as a low-grade ache he cannot fully name. But it resurfaces, because the imprint is not conceptual. It is embodied. This is why he may seem fine on the outside while still carrying her deeply on the inside. He may function well. He may do everything right. He may even look calm. But inner calm and outer composure are not the same thing. The outer man can continue. The inner man still remembers. He remembers how her energy quieted him, how it exposed him, how it made him feel both held and revealed, how something in him relaxed and woke up at the same time. That is not easy to replace. And that is another reason he cannot forget. Because replacement rarely works when the issue is not preference but recognition. You can replace distraction with another distraction. You cannot easily replace recognition. He may meet other people, hear other voices, move through other experiences. But if none of those carry the same energetic truth, then they will not erase what her energy meant. In fact, they may sharpen the contrast even more. He may begin realizing that what stayed with him was not simply attraction, but resonance. And resonance is not reproduced on command. This can make him even more inward. Because now he has to face an uncomfortable truth. He is not failing to forget because he lacks discipline. He is failing to forget because something in him knows this mattered. That realization creates humility. Not always immediately. Sometimes first it creates frustration. Why can't I shut this off? Why does the feeling keep returning? Why does distance not solve this? Why does she stay with me even when I am doing everything I can to move on? Because moving on is difficult when the soul is still trying to understand what happened. This is where the divine masculine often experiences the strange pain of being split between intention and imprint. Intention says, leave it alone. Imprint says, it is still here. Intention says, get back to normal. Imprint says, normal changed the moment truth touched you. That split is exhausting. And eventually, it teaches him something very important. Forgetting is not the same as healing. This is the lesson the old self resists. The old self wants removal. Healing asks for understanding. The old self wants emotional closure through distance. Healing asks, what exactly is it that you are trying not to feel? And usually the answer is deeper than her. He is trying not to feel. How much he cared. How deeply he was seen. How alive he felt. How much the old life no longer satisfies. How much of himself was awakened in her presence. That is why he tries to forget but can't. Because forgetting her would also mean forgetting the truth about himself that became visible around her. And that truth keeps asking to be acknowledged. Not because it wants to torture him. Because it wants integration. It wants him to stop living as though the awakening never happened. It wants him to stop acting as though the old self can continue ruling without consequence. It wants him to see that what lingers is not a mistake in the system. It is the system being shown its limits. Maybe that is the deepest truth of this chapter. He tries to forget her energy because the old self still believes forgetting will bring relief. But he can't forget because what her energy awakened is now part of his reality. Part of his emotional reality. Part of his spiritual reality. Part of his self-knowledge. And once self-knowledge has been awakened in that way, forgetting is no longer a matter of distance. It becomes a matter of whether he is willing to face what the memory is asking of him. That is why the energy stays. Not just to remind him of her, but to remind him of the truth in himself that her energy called into the light. And until that truth is honored, forgetting will keep failing. Because the soul is not trying to help him erase what happened. It is trying to help him understand why it mattered. Chapter 7. Her energy changed the way the old life feels. One of the deepest reasons he can't forget her energy after this is because her energy did not only touch him in the moment. It changed the way the rest of his life feels afterward. That is what makes it so difficult to escape. Because before her energy reached him, the old life may have been enough. Not perfect. Not deeply fulfilling, maybe. But enough. Enough to function. Enough to stay busy. Enough to keep moving. Enough to call routine peace, distance clarity, emotional restraint strength. And the dull ache underneath all of it just life. But then her energy entered. And something shifted. Now what once felt normal starts feeling flatter. What once felt manageable starts feeling empty. What once felt like stability starts feeling like emotional half-light. That is the contrast her energy creates. And contrast is one of the hardest things to live with once it has been felt. Because now he knows something he did not fully know before. He knows what it felt like to be more alive. More present. More reached. More emotionally honest inside himself. More aware of what tenderness, depth, and real feminine presence can awaken in him. And once a man has felt that, the old life does not always satisfy him in the same way. That is why he can't just move on by returning to normal. Normal has changed. Not necessarily on the outside. His job may be the same. His routines may be the same. His environment may look exactly as it did before. But inside, no. Inside, normal has been interrupted. Because her energy gave him a reference point. A reference for what real calm feels like. A reference for what real energetic truth feels like. A reference for what it feels like when someone's presence touches the soul instead of merely stimulating the mind. That reference becomes the problem for the old self. Because the old self wants to settle back into familiar patterns. Into work. Into logic. Into distraction. Into emotional distance. Into the life he knew how to manage before something so real reached him. But the soul now compares. It compares the old life to what he felt around her. It compares ordinary interactions to the emotional depth of her presence. It compares the familiar numbness to the aliveness she stirred. And often, the old life loses some of its color in that comparison. This does not mean everything suddenly collapses. It means subtle dissatisfaction begins growing. A quiet emptiness. A strange flatness. An inability to feel fully nourished by what once seemed sufficient. He may not know how to explain it. He may just feel more restless. More inward. More emotionally elsewhere than before. But what is really happening is this. Her energy changed the emotional standard inside him. Before, he could live within certain limits. Now he has felt beyond them. Before, he could call emotional distance fine. Now fine feels less convincing. Before, he could mistake control for peace. Now peace has a different face in his memory. That is why her energy lingers. Because it is not only a memory of her. It is a living contrast between truth and habit. Truth felt like softness without force. Habit feels like survival without aliveness. Truth felt like being seen without performance. Habit feels like returning to the role. Truth felt like presence. Habit feels like managing. And once that contrast exists, his relationship to the old life changes. This is where the divine masculine often begins feeling emotionally displaced. Not fully ready for the new life. But no longer fully at home in the old one. That in-between is painful. Because he may still do all the same things, yet something inside him is no longer participating with the same innocence. He may go through the motions, but part of him knows those motions are not enough. He may continue the old patterns, but part of him feels how little life is in them now. He may try to stay practical, but practicality begins feeling emotionally expensive. That is the hidden ache. And it is one of the strongest signs that her energy truly changed him. Because if her energy had only been attractive, he could miss it and move on. But if her energy changed the way ordinary life feels, then he is now living with a kind of spiritual homesickness. A homesickness not necessarily for a person alone, but for the truth he felt in her presence. That is harder to escape, because the old life now carries the absence of something real. The room feels different. The silence feels different. His own emotional world feels different. He may find himself comparing without wanting to compare. Not always comparing people in a conscious, superficial way, but comparing states. How alive he felt then. How muted he feels now. How open he felt then. How controlled he feels now. How honest his body felt then. How managed his life feels now. This is what her energy changed. It changed the internal measure. And once the internal measure changes, contentment becomes harder to fake. This is why some divine masculines become more serious, quieter, or strangely dissatisfied after a real energetic encounter. It is not always because something went wrong. Sometimes it is because something went too right, too true, too revealing. And now the old compromises feel harder to tolerate. The compromise of not saying what he feels. The compromise of staying in emotional distance. The compromise of calling less enough. The compromise of living in structures that do not fully nourish the soul. That is what becomes visible after her energy. And maybe that is why the old life can start feeling emotionally smaller. Because her energy expanded his awareness of what is possible. Once he knows what it feels like to be deeply met, the unmoving life becomes more noticeable. Once he knows what it feels like to be energetically affected in truth, deadened routine becomes more obvious. Once he knows what it feels like for peace and exposure to coexist, the old piece of numbness begins losing its glamour. That is a huge shift. Because it means her energy did not simply leave an emotional mark. It created a new hunger. A hunger for what feels real. A hunger for what carries life. A hunger for the kind of connection that makes the soul louder and the mask weaker. And hunger changes how a man experiences everything else. Things that once felt satisfying now feel partial. Things that once distracted him now feel temporary. Things that once made sense now feel incomplete. He may try to ignore that. But the body knows. The heart knows. The soul knows. This is why he cannot forget her energy after this. Because forgetting her would not return him to the old innocence. It would not restore the old life to its former feeling. He now knows too much. He knows what a different emotional reality feels like. And that knowledge keeps pressing against the life he returns to. That is what creates the ache. Not just missing her. Missing what became possible in him through her. This is one of the deepest pains of real connection. It does not only take up space in his memory. It begins making his old emotional environment feel too small for what has awakened. And until he either deadens himself again or grows into a different level of truth, he will feel that tension. That tension is sacred. Because it means the soul is no longer content with imitation. No longer content with surface. No longer content with survival disguised as peace. Her energy changed that. Not by forcing him. By revealing. Revealing that he is capable of more depth. More tenderness. More truth. More aliveness than the old self wants to allow. And once that revelation happens, the old life cannot fully feel like home anymore. Maybe that is the deepest truth of this chapter. He can't forget her energy, because her energy changed the way the old life feels. It made normal feel less alive. It made routine feel less complete. It made emotional distance feel less peaceful. It made him aware of what he had been missing without even knowing how much he missed it. That awareness becomes its own kind of turning point. Because once a man starts feeling the old life as emotionally insufficient, change is no longer a distant possibility. It becomes an inner pressure, an inner knowing, a quiet but relentless truth that says, you have felt something real now. And because you have felt it, you can no longer fully settle for what kept you asleep before. That is why her energy lingers. It does not only call him back to her. It calls him forward from the life that is no longer enough. And that is far more difficult to forget than memory alone. Chapter 8: The signs he is still carrying her energy. How do you know he is still carrying her energy? Not just remembering her. Not just thinking about her occasionally. Not just holding on to a story in his mind. How do you know her energy is still active inside him? You know because the imprint remains alive in the way he moves, feels, and relates to himself after the connection has already changed form. That is the key. When someone's energy has truly reached the divine masculine, it does not disappear simply because the outer interaction becomes quieter, more distant, more uncertain, or even absent for a time. If it was only surface attraction, time may blur it. If it was only chemistry, distraction may weaken it. But when her energy entered the deeper emotional and spiritual layers of his being, the signs remain. Not always obvious. Not always spoken. Not always easy to read from the outside. But real. The first sign is this. 1. He replays the feeling of her presence. This is one of the clearest signs. He may not even replay specific conversations as much as he replays the feeling, the atmosphere around her, the emotional texture of being near her, the strange combination of peace, truth, softness, and exposure that came alive in her presence. That matters. Because when he is still carrying her energy, it is not just the memory of what happened that returns. It is the energetic state itself. He remembers how he felt in his body, how the room felt different, how his inner world felt more awake, more honest, more touched than usual. And that kind of remembering is hard to erase because it is not only mental, it is embodied. 2. He becomes quieter and more inward. When a man is carrying an energetic imprint he cannot fully explain, he often becomes more internal. Not necessarily dramatic. Not necessarily emotionally expressive. But quieter. More reflective. More serious. More difficult to distract from whatever is still moving inside him. He may seem distant at times, but the distance is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is processing. Sometimes it is the old self trying to understand why one person's energy changed the emotional atmosphere inside him so much. This inwardness is a sign that the connection is still alive beneath the surface. Because if her energy had truly passed through without changing him, he would likely return more easily to his old rhythm. But when he stays more inward, it often means something unresolved, or more truthfully, something still active, remains inside him. 3. Distance does not bring full relief. This is one of the strongest signs of all. If he is still carrying her energy, distance may create separation but not relief. He may step back, go quiet, get busy, try to focus elsewhere. But something in him remains affected. The distance does not settle the nervous system the way he hoped. The silence does not erase the feeling. The space may reduce contact, but it does not undo the imprint. In some cases, distance even makes the energetic memory louder, because without the outer interaction, all that remains is the contrast between ordinary life and what her presence awakened. That contrast becomes harder to ignore. 4. He feels restless without fully knowing why. Restlessness is another major sign. Not just ordinary stress. A deeper emotional unrest. He may feel off, more easily distracted, unable to feel fully satisfied by the old routines, quietly agitated in moments when nothing obvious is wrong. Why? Because her energy changed his inner baseline. It made him aware of a deeper emotional reality, and now the old life does not fit the same way. Even if he cannot name that directly, the body often knows before the mind fully understands. This is why he can seem unsettled without being able to explain what is wrong. It is not always wrong. It is often the sign that her energy is still moving through him. 5. He compares other connections to how she felt. This is an especially painful sign. He may meet other people, hear other voices, try other situations. But inwardly, some part of him keeps comparing. Not always in a conscious, shallow way. Not necessarily comparing appearances or personalities. Often he is comparing the feeling, the depth, the emotional resonance, the way her energy touched him beyond words, the way he felt more real in her presence than in more ordinary interactions. This comparison matters because it reveals that what he misses is not only a person. It is the frequency, And once a man has felt a frequency that reached him deeply, other things can feel flatter by contrast. 6. He starts questioning the life he returns to. When he is still carrying her energy, ordinary life often starts feeling more emotionally exposed. The routines still exist, but they feel different. The old patterns still function, but they feel less alive. The emotional distance he once trusted begins losing its glamour. This can show up as dissatisfaction, subtle grief, or a quiet sense that something is missing. Not because everything externally changed, because internally he did. And once he changes internally, the life that fit the old version of him may start feeling less convincing. That is a very real sign that her energy is still active in him. 7. He feels more emotion than he can easily name. This is another important sign. When her energy is still living inside him, he may feel longing, sadness, tenderness, heaviness, or even guilt and emotional confusion. But he may not know how to label it cleanly. Why? Because the imprint is energetic before it becomes verbal. The body, heart, and soul are carrying something the mind is still trying to interpret. This can make his emotions feel layered and difficult to explain. He may just know that he is more affected, more emotionally open in some places, and less at peace with the old self than before. That emotional complexity is a sign that the energy has not left. 8. He begins seeing his defenses more clearly. This is a powerful sign of real change. When he is still carrying her energy, he often starts becoming more aware of his own defenses. The old patterns become harder to romanticize. Silence feels heavier. Distance feels lonelier. Control feels more exhausting. The old identity feels more like armor than truth. That awareness means the imprint is doing deeper work. Because her energy did not just create feeling, it created reflection. It showed him what it feels like to be reached. And now the defenses that keep him from that level of truth feel more visible than before. That visibility is a major sign that he is still carrying her energy at a soul level. 9. He cannot fully return to who he was before. This may be the deepest sign of all. Even if outwardly he is still trying to keep life the same, something inside him cannot fully go back. He cannot completely believe in the old emotional neutrality. He cannot completely believe in the old peace of distance. He cannot completely pretend that what he felt was small. Why? Because something in him has already crossed a line. A line from emotional sleep to emotional awareness. From routine to contrast. From defense to the knowledge that he is more reachable than he thought. And once a man knows that even if he resists it, the old self is never fully intact in the same way again. 10. He carries an unfinished feeling in the quiet. This is the final sign. When everything else gets quiet, the unfinished feeling remains. Not always dramatic. Not always obsessive. But there. A low ache. A pull. A sense of incompletion. A feeling that something real entered his life and his soul has not finished understanding it yet. This unfinished feeling is one of the strongest proofs that he is still carrying her energy. Because if the imprint had cleared, the inner field would settle. Instead, part of him remains in contact with what was awakened. And that contact keeps him from fully forgetting. These are the signs. Not loud signs. Not always obvious signs. But true signs. He replays the feeling of her presence. He becomes quieter and more inward. Distance does not bring relief. Restlessness lingers. Other connections feel different by comparison. The old life begins feeling thinner. His emotions become harder to dismiss. His defenses become more visible. He cannot fully go back. And in the quiet, something unfinished remains. That is how you know he is still carrying her energy. Because what stays in him is not only a person. It is the truth her energy awakened. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. When a man is still carrying her energy, the strongest sign is not necessarily what he says. It is that the old self no longer feels as comfortable, as convincing, or as alive as it did before she reached him. That is the imprint. That is the sign. And that is why some energies are not forgotten. They continue working on him long after the outer moment has passed. Chapter 9: Why this often begins as confusion. One of the hardest parts of this journey is that he usually does not understand it right away. He feels it first. That is why this often begins as confusion. Because when a man cannot forget her energy after this, what is happening inside him is not neat, linear, or emotionally convenient. It is not a tidy realization where he immediately thinks, "Ah, this is soul recognition. This is why her energy stays with me. This is why ordinary life feels different now." No. More often, it begins as inner disruption. He feels off, restless, drawn and resistant at the same time, quietly affected in ways he cannot fully explain, more emotional than he wants to admit, more inward than usual, more haunted by contrast than by logic. And because he cannot immediately explain it, he experiences it as confusion. That is important to understand, because confusion is not proof that nothing real happened. Sometimes confusion is proof that something too real happened for the old self to process cleanly. Her energy may have reached him before the mind had a story for it, before his emotional defenses could categorize it, before the old identity could decide whether this was safe, dangerous, meaningful, temporary, or life-changing. So what happens? The body responds first. The soul responds first. The heart responds first. And the mind gets left behind trying to catch up. That creates confusion. He may tell himself, maybe it was just intensity. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I just need space. Maybe it meant less than it felt like. Maybe if I stay busy, it will pass. These are not always lies. They are often early attempts to create order. Because the divine masculine may not be used to a connection affecting him at this level. He may be used to attraction he can manage, emotion he can contain, distance he can use to reset. But when someone's energy bypasses his defenses, awakens his deeper self, and changes how the old life feels, the experience moves beyond what the old system knows how to classify. That is why confusion comes first. He does not yet know whether what he is feeling is longing, fear, recognition, grief, spiritual disruption, emotional memory, or all of it at once. He only knows something is different now. Something is staying with him. Something in him is no longer fully cooperating with the old emotional script. That can feel disorienting, because the old self depends on certainty. It wants to know, what is this? What does it mean? How do I control it? How do I reduce it? How do I make it fit inside the life I already know? But soul-level energy does not fit easily. It exposes before it explains. It stirs before it clarifies. It awakens before it organizes. So the first stage is often messy. He may feel more and speak less. He may pull away while inwardly carrying even more. He may become emotionally contradictory because one part of him is trying to protect the old life, while another part has already been touched by something too real to fully dismiss. That contradiction is confusion. Not emptiness, not indifference, not necessarily rejection of what happened. Just a man standing between two worlds. The old emotional structure, and the new truth her energy awakened. That in-between is not clear. It is sacred disorientation. Because before he can understand why he can't forget her energy, he often has to feel the limits of everything he used to trust. He has to feel the old defenses fail to bring relief. He has to feel that work, logic, silence, distance, and routine are not solving what remains. He has to feel the contrast between the old peace and the real peace he touched near her. That contrast creates confusion because it changes the reference point. What once felt enough no longer feels enough. What once felt stable now feels flat. What once felt like control now feels like emotional exile. He may not know how to say that. He may just feel increasingly disconnected from the old life without understanding why. That is the soul beginning to speak louder than the old self. And the old self does not like that, because the old self wants simple explanations. You're just overwhelmed. This is temporary. Don't make it bigger than it is. Get back to normal. But her energy keeps returning in the quiet. And that return creates the deeper confusion. If this was small, why does it still feel so alive? If this was nothing, why does distance not solve it? If this was ordinary, why does the old life feel different after it? These questions do not come from fantasy. They come from contact. From the fact that her energy touched something he can no longer keep fully asleep. And once something in him has awakened, confusion becomes part of the early process because the old identity is still trying to protect a life built without that awakened truth at the center. So yes, he may misname it at first. He may call it stress, bad timing, intensity, complication, emotional overload. But underneath all those words is often one deeper reality. He is struggling to explain why her energy reached him more deeply than he was prepared for. That is why confusion is sacred here. Because it means the old categories are breaking. His usual understanding of himself is not enough. His usual emotional tools are not enough. His usual distance from the truth is not enough. And when the old categories break, clarity does not arrive immediately. First comes the fog, the in-between, the inwardness, the emotional noise, the strange mixture of wanting to move closer and needing to step back. This is especially true because her energy likely awakened more than one thing at once. It may have awakened longing, tenderness, fear of being seen, emotional hunger, grief for what he buried, recognition of what the old life lacks. That is a lot for one nervous system to hold all at once. No wonder it begins in confusion. Because confusion is often what happens when the soul is ahead of the mind. The soul already knows. This mattered. This reached me. This changed something. The mind is still trying to determine. Why? How? What do I do with this? That gap between the soul's knowing and the mind's delay is where confusion lives. And if he is especially defended, especially used to self-control, especially reliant on logic and emotional order, the confusion may deepen before it clears. Because the more the old self depends on certainty, the more destabilizing it is to encounter something that cannot be immediately explained away without lying to himself. That is why this stage can look like withdrawal. He goes inward because inward is where the war is happening. He goes quiet because language has not caught up to truth. He creates space because part of him still hopes distance will help him regain clarity. But often, distance only makes the imprint more obvious. Because her energy is still there. Not physically. Energetically. Emotionally. As contrast. As memory. As awakening. And once awakening begins, confusion is often the first honest sign. Not because the path is wrong. Because the old self is no longer qualified to explain what the soul has already recognized. Maybe that is the deepest truth of this chapter. This begins as confusion because her energy touched something deeper than his normal ways of understanding. It reached the self beneath the self, the longing beneath the logic, the truth beneath the control. And when that kind of truth rises, the old identity does not respond with calm certainty. It responds with disruption. But disruption is not failure. It is the doorway. Because once a man becomes confused by what he can no longer reduce, he is much closer to awakening than the man who still believes his old explanations without question. That is the hidden grace. The confusion means something real got through. Something deep enough to disturb the old order. Something honest enough to keep returning. Something alive enough that forgetting is no longer just a matter of time. And once he begins sensing that, even if he still has no perfect words for it, the path has already changed. Because the man who is confused by the truth is still closer to awakening than the man who feels nothing at all. That is why this often begins here. In confusion. In quiet. In inner contradiction. Because before he can fully understand why he can't forget her energy, he first has to realize that what her energy touched in him is real enough to make the old self lose its certainty. And once certainty breaks, the soul begins taking the lead. That is where the next stage begins. Chapter 10. The deeper meaning of why he can't forget her energy. After all the silence, all the distance, all the overthinking, all the moments he tried to explain away, reduce, control, or outrun, one truth remains. He can't forget her energy, because her energy awakened something real in him. That is the deeper meaning. It was never only about chemistry. Never only about attraction. Never only about missing a person, replaying a moment, or getting trapped in a memory. It was about activation. Her energy activated the self he had kept hidden, the tenderness he had buried, the emotional truth he had disciplined himself not to trust too much, the deeper hunger he had learned to call not important, the soul-level longing he could carry quietly for years until one real presence made it impossible to stay quiet inside him anymore. That is why her energy stays. Because what lingers is not just who she was. It is who he became in contact with her. He became softer, more honest, more exposed, more aware of what he was missing, more aware that the old peace he trusted was not peace at all, only distance dressed up as control. That realization changes a man. Not always outwardly at first. Not in clean, immediate ways. Sometimes it changes him through confusion, through silence, through restlessness, through the strange ache of trying to return to an old life that no longer feels emotionally convincing after something so true has touched him. But even then it is change. Because once her energy has shown him what real presence feels like, ordinary emotional numbness cannot fully satisfy him anymore. Once he has felt the difference between being admired and being seen, between surface chemistry and soul-level resonance, between controlled calm and actual inner exhale, the old life becomes harder to wear with the same innocence. That is the spiritual meaning of why he can't forget. He is not only remembering her. He is remembering truth. Truth about what he wants. Truth about what he fears. Truth about how much of himself he has hidden. Truth about how deeply he can still be moved. Truth about the fact that his soul is not as asleep as the old self wanted to believe. And when truth has been felt in the body, in the heart, in the nervous system, forgetting is no longer simple. Because the body remembers what the mind tries to minimize. The soul remembers what the ego tries to reduce. The heart remembers what control tries to bury again. That is why distance does not solve it. Silence may delay it. Routine may distract from it. Time may reshape it. But if the energy awakens something sacred, the imprint remains until the lesson is honored. And the lesson is not always, go back. Sometimes the lesson is, stop lying about what this revealed. Stop pretending the old life is enough. Stop calling numbness peace. Stop worshiping the defenses that kept you far from your own heart. Stop acting as though being deeply reached is weakness, when it may be the most honest thing that has happened to you in years. That is what her energy came to expose. Not to destroy him. To reveal him. To reveal the man beneath the control. The man beneath the silence. The man beneath the emotional discipline. The man who still longs for truth, connection, safety, tenderness. And a life that feels more real than the one built by survival alone. That is why he can't forget her energy after this. Because her energy did not simply enter his life. It interrupted his illusion. The illusion that he was untouched. The illusion that he needed less than he truly needed. The illusion that he could live half awake forever and still feel whole. The illusion that he could protect himself from feeling deeply without also protecting himself from life itself. Once that illusion breaks, a man is never quite the same. He may still resist. Still pull away. Still need time to understand what happened. But inwardly, the old certainty is gone. And in its place is a quieter, deeper knowing. Something real reached me. That is what he cannot forget. Not because she was loud. Because she was true. Not because she forced herself into his world. Because her energy met the exact place where his soul had been waiting to be touched. Not because she only gave him emotion. Because she gave him contrast. Contrast between old peace and real peace. Between survival and aliveness. Between control and truth. Between the self he has been and the self he can no longer fully keep asleep. That contrast becomes the inner teacher. It teaches him why other things feel flatter now. Why silence feels heavier. Why ordinary life does not settle him in the same way. Why he keeps returning, not only to her memory, but to the feeling of who he was around her. Because that feeling carried life. And life is hard to forget once you have lived too long inside emotional half-light. Maybe that is the deepest message of this entire video. He cannot forget her energy, because her energy did not only touch his heart. It touched his truth. And truth, once awakened, does not disappear just because the outer moment passes. It waits. It lingers. It works on him in silence. It follows him into routine. It asks whether he wants to keep living from the old self or finally become honest about what her presence awakened. That is the deeper meaning. Her energy was not just something he felt. It was something that revealed him to himself. And once a man has been revealed to himself in that way, forgetting is no longer just about another person. It becomes about whether he is willing to unknow his own awakening. And usually he cannot. That is why her energy stays. Because what it touched was never small. It was the sleeping self, the buried truth, the soul that can no longer fully return to emotional sleep after being reached by something real. And that is why, even in distance, even in silence, even in confusion, even in time, he still remembers. So if this message found you at the right moment, let this be your reminder. Not every energy that lingers is meant to torment you. Not every connection that changes you is meant to be dismissed as just intensity. Not every memory that stays is there because you are weak. Sometimes it stays because it was true. Sometimes someone's energy remains in your spirit because it awakened the version of you that was finally ready to live more honestly. And sometimes the reason he can't forget her energy after this is because he can't unfeel the truth she awakened inside him. If this resonated with you, comment below. Her energy awakened the truth. And tell me, have you ever felt someone's energy stay with you long after the moment ended? Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Subscribe for more divine masculine, twin flame, and spiritual psychology content.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.